Archons are real, not as mythology, not as metaphor, as a living, functioning system of interference operating inside your consciousness right now, shaping your fears, hijacking your seeking, mimicking your spiritual growth while quietly keeping you locked inside the very separation they were built to maintain. Mary Magdalene knew this, not as a theological position, not as an idea she inherited from someone else, as a lived, breathing, daily reality that she had moved through in her own consciousness and come out the other side of. She knew what the Archons were, she knew how they operated, and she knew exactly what dissolved them. And if you are watching this video, you already know what I am talking about too. You have felt it, that pull backward every time you get close to something genuine, that loop that never quite resolves, that gap between knowing and actually being free. You have been living inside that gap, and you are tired of it. Mary Magdalene found the exit, not through years of elaborate ritual, not through a secret society that required the right bloodline or the right teacher, through a single word in Aramaic, the language she spoke, breathed, and prayed in every day of her life. One word that is so structurally opposed to everything the Archons are built from, that when a human consciousness speaks it with real understanding, from an honest inner position, the Archonic architecture simply has no frequency left to grip. It dissolves, not dramatically, not with thunder and light. It dissolves the way a knot dissolves when you finally find the right thread to pull. That word is what this video is about. I am going to give it to you, but not yet. Because if I gave it to you right now, in this first minute, before you understand what it is actually doing and why it works at the level it works, it would be just another sound. Another piece of spiritual vocabulary you carry around without it changing anything real. The word needs a container, and building that container is exactly what the next hour is for. So let me be clear about what kind of video this is. This is not an introduction to Gnostic cosmology. This is not a beginner video on Archons. You already know the basics. What you are here for is the layer beneath the basics, the functional, experiential, living layer that most channels never reach, because reaching it requires a willingness to go somewhere genuinely uncomfortable. It requires honesty about where you actually are in your consciousness, not where your spiritual identity tells you that you are. Mary Magdalene was not a symbol. She was not a footnote. She was not the repentant sinner that the institution spent centuries insisting she was. She was a transmission keeper, a living carrier of functional spiritual technology. And the word she carried, the Aramaic word at the center of her teaching, is not historical artifact. It is alive, it is available, and by the end of this video, it will be yours. Stay with me. Every single segment of what follows is building toward the moment that word lands. And when it lands, if you have traveled the full journey with me, you will not just hear it. You will recognize it, like something that was always yours, that you had simply been talked out of remembering. Now, let us begin where everything begins in this tradition, with the question of who Mary Magdalene actually was, not what 2,000 years of institutional distortion decided she was, but what the evidence, the esoteric tradition, and something deeper than both of those things, reveals her to be. Let me tell you something that took me a long time to fully settle in my own understanding. The erasure of Mary Magdalene was not a mistake. It was not a cultural oversight that nobody got around to correcting. It was deliberate, systematic, carefully maintained across centuries. And the reason it had to be so deliberate, the reason so much institutional energy went into diminishing one woman, is precisely because what she carried was powerful enough to make the entire system of spiritual intermediaries unnecessary. Think about that. You only work that hard to erase someone when what they represent is genuinely threatening to what you are building. Mary Magdalene came from Magdala, a city on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. Prosperous, cosmopolitan, sitting at a crossroads of trade and culture. In Aramaic, the word Magdala means the tower. And in the esoteric tradition she moved within, the tower is not an architectural feature. The tower is the elevated point of perception, the place from which you can see the full landscape that others, still on the ground, cannot see. Her very name, in the language of her own people, encoded her function in the world. She was Miriam of the Tower, the elevated one, the one with the long view, the one who could see what others were still too close to see clearly. The institution took that name and spent centuries burying it under the image of a fallen woman. Of course they did, because a woman whose name in her own language means elevated consciousness and perception is fundamentally incompatible with a religious system that requires you to believe you need an intermediary between yourself and the divine. But here is what matters far more than the politics of that erasure. Mary Magdalene's understanding of reality was not derived from texts. It was not theological in the way we use that word today. It was direct, experiential. She understood things because she had moved through them in her own consciousness, in her own body, in her own inner field. The mystical traditions that preserved fragments of her teaching, and they exist, scattered, hidden in plain sight across several lineages, are unanimous on this point. She was not a believer in the conventional sense. She was a knower, and the distance between those two things is infinite. A believer holds information about the divine and calls it faith. You can challenge a belief, argue it away, introduce enough doubt, and the whole structure wobbles. A knower has been inside the direct experience of what the divine actually is, and that cannot be argued away. That cannot be erased by reframing the biography. The institution could strip her of her apostolic authority in the official record. It could bury her texts. It could turn her name into a synonym for sin. But it could not touch the transmission itself, because the transmission was never in the texts. It lived in the direct chain of those who received it, embodied it, and passed it forward person to person, breath to breath, word to word. I want to say something here that is my own conviction, not historical analysis, not scholarly consensus, my genuine personal understanding after years of sitting with this material. I believe Mary Magdalene was not a disciple in the way that word is usually meant. Disciple implies someone learning from a teacher, following behind, receiving what the teacher dispenses. What the evidence points to, when you look carefully at the Gnostic traditions, at the Sophia lineage, at the specific and unrepeatable role she played at the most critical moment in the entire story, is that she was a co-initiate, someone moving on a parallel track of realization, someone who understood from the inside rather than from instruction, someone who, in certain moments, understood things that even the other close companions had not yet reached. She was the first witness at the resurrection. Every tradition preserves this. Even the canonical texts that tried hardest to minimize her could not remove this fact. She was there first. She arrived in the darkness, before anyone else alone. And she did not just observe something. She received something. In that moment of maximum darkness, maximum grief, maximum dissolution of everything she had believed the story was going to be, she received the transmission that she would spend the rest of her life carrying and teaching. And she received it because she already had the internal structure to hold it. In the Sophia tradition, the tradition of divine feminine wisdom that runs like a hidden underground river beneath the surface of early mystical Christianity, Mary is understood as the earthly embodiment of Sophia herself. Sophia, whose name simply means wisdom, is the feminine divine principle in Gnostic cosmology, the one who descended into matter, became lost in the forgetting, and then remembered her true nature and returned. Her story is the story of every human soul. Descent, confusion, recognition, return, and Mary Magdalene's life traces exactly this arc, not as symbol but as lived reality. She is not the image of repentance that the institution manufactured. She is the image of anamnesis, the ancient Greek word for the soul's act of remembering what it truly is beneath everything it has been told it is. What she remembered, what sat at the absolute center of her transmission, was a word in Aramaic, her own language, the language she thought in, dreamed in, prayed in. A word so fundamental to the structure of reality that the Archons, the forces whose entire existence depends on you forgetting your true origin, cannot survive inside the field it generates. We're going to reach that word. But first you need to understand the Archons not as a concept, but as a lived experience. Because until you can recognize exactly how they operate in your own daily consciousness, the specific ways they move, the specific disguises they wear, the word will have no real target. And a key with no lock is just a piece of metal. Let me start this segment with something personal, because I think it will land more honestly than any definition I could open with. There was a period in my own path, and I think you probably know this period intimately because you have likely lived your own version of it, where I genuinely knew things. I had moved through real experiences of expanded consciousness. I had felt, at least in moments, what it was like to be something larger than my ordinary sense of self. I had understood certain things about the nature of reality that the average person had not yet touched. And yet, there was something that kept pulling me back. Not external circumstances. Something inside. A gravity. A contraction. A loop. Sometimes it wore the face of fear. Sometimes it wore the face of unworthiness. Sometimes, And this is the one that took me longest to see. It wore the face of spiritual seeking itself. The endless searching that never arrives. The perpetual becoming that never quite lands in being. Whatever costume it was wearing, it always had the same function underneath. It always pulled me away from the direct experience of what I actually am and back into the cramped, anxious experience of being a separate, limited, endangered self navigating a world that is fundamentally indifferent to me. I did not have clear language for what that was for a long time. When I finally went deep into the Gnostic understanding of Archons, not the surface version, not the ancient aliens version, not the cartoon demon version, something clicked into place that has never unclicked. Because the Gnostic tradition was not describing external forces. It was describing that internal gravity with precise, functional, cosmologically grounded language. It was giving a name and a structure to something I had been experiencing for years without knowing what I was dealing with. So let me give you that understanding now, as precisely as I can, without making it needlessly complicated. In Gnostic cosmology, the world as we experience it, the world of separation, of time, of limitation, of the persistent feeling that something is fundamentally wrong, was not created by the highest divine source. It was created by a secondary being, the demiurge. The word comes from Greek and means craftsman or artisan. The demiurge is a being of real power and considerable intelligence, but not of the highest order, not of the order of the true source. And crucially, the demiurge does not know this. It genuinely believes it is the ultimate. It believes its creation is the totality of reality. And from that single foundational error, that cosmic misidentification, everything that is wrong with the experienced world flows outward. The demiurge created a world that mimics the divine without being divine. Forms that look like life but are hollow at the center. Order that looks like intelligence but runs on mechanical repetition. Structure that looks like meaning but points nowhere beyond itself. It is an extraordinarily sophisticated copy. But it is a copy. And copies have a specific quality that originals do not have. They cannot generate genuine life. They can only rearrange what already exists. To maintain this copied world, to keep its structures running, the demiurge employed a hierarchy of subordinate forces. These are the Archons. The word means rulers or administrators in Greek. They are the maintainers of the structure, the ones who keep the walls of the copied reality in place. Now here is the part that matters most for your actual experience, for your actual daily life, for the work you are trying to do right now in your own consciousness. The Archons are not primarily out there. They are in here. They are internalized structures of perception. They are the automated programs running beneath your conscious awareness that generate the experience of separation as your default reality. They are not beings you need to fight in some external spiritual battlefield. They are patterns you need to recognize in the movements of your own mind. Let me make this concrete. The Archon of fear does not appear as a monster. It appears as a very reasonable-sounding inner voice that explains, very logically, why this is not the right time, why you are not ready, why the risk is too great, why the thing you feel called to do is probably not as important as you think. It sounds like wisdom. It sounds like self-protection. It functions as a cage, the Archon of false spirituality, and this one is particularly relevant for the kind of person watching this video. Does not appear as obvious delusion. It appears as spiritual seeking that is just sophisticated enough to feel real, but is actually circular. It keeps you in the position of seeker permanently, because a seeker who arrives is a seeker who no longer needs the system. So the Archon of false spirituality manufactures endless content, endless teachers, endless frameworks, all of which gesture toward liberation while quietly ensuring you remain in the orbit of seeking rather than arriving. The Archons operate through mimicry. This is their central mechanism. They take genuine divine qualities, love, reverence, humility, devotion, wisdom, and they produce copies of them. Copies that feel almost like the real thing. Fear that looks like reverence. Guilt that looks like genuine humility. Spiritual ego that looks like devotion. Intellectual understanding that looks like wisdom. The copy is close enough that you accept it. You build your spiritual life on it. And then you wonder why, years later, something still does not feel resolved. There are traditionally 7 Archons in Gnostic cosmology, 7 layers of the constructed world. And it is not an accident that this maps with remarkable precision onto the 7 layers of the human psyche, the 7 energy centers, the 7 levels of consciousness from the most dense and material to the most subtle and borderline transcendent. The Archons are not external rulers of external realms. They are the rulers of the layers of your own inner world, each one governing a specific mode of contracted perception. And here is what makes them so difficult to dissolve through ordinary spiritual practice. Most spiritual practice works within the Archonic field. Meditation that is about achieving a certain state, Archonic. Prayer that is fundamentally petitioning something outside yourself for relief from your condition, Archonic. Even certain forms of energy work that are primarily about moving around the furniture of your inner world rather than questioning the structure of the building itself, Archonic. The Archons do not mind spiritual practice. Spiritual practice keeps you busy, keeps you feeling like you are making progress, keeps you from asking the question that would actually dissolve the whole structure. Who is it that is separate from the source in the first place? Mary Magdalene asked that question, and she did not ask it philosophically. She asked it from inside the most devastating experience of her life. From inside grief so complete that the entire world had collapsed. And the answer that came back to her was not a thought. It was a word that did not answer the question intellectually, but dissolved the premise of the question entirely. That word is coming. But before it can arrive with its full weight, you need to understand one more thing. You need to understand why Aramaic specifically, why this particular language, was the vehicle for a transmission of this magnitude. Most people who encounter Aramaic encounter it as a historical curiosity, the language of a particular time and place, the language that Jesus spoke, the language of certain ancient texts. They treat it the way you treat a museum exhibit, interesting, important in its context, but essentially inert. A relic, that is the single most costly misunderstanding you can bring to this material. Aramaic is not inert. It never was. And the people who used it in the tradition we are talking about, the inner circle, the transmission keepers, the ones who gathered around Mary Magdalene and received what she carried, they knew this with absolute precision. They knew that Aramaic was not just a communication system. It was a vibrational architecture, a language in which the sounds themselves were understood to be shapes of reality, not labels applied to reality from the outside. Let me explain what I mean by that, because it is not a poetic statement. It is a functional one. In the ancient Near Eastern understanding of language, shared across Hebrew, Aramaic, and the deeper Semitic root traditions, a word is not a symbol that points to a thing. A word is a force. It is a configuration of breath and sound that interacts with the fabric of reality in a specific way. When you speak a word in this understanding, you are not describing something. You are doing something. You are generating a specific frequency combination that has a specific effect on the field of consciousness, both your own and the shared field you exist within. This is why the opening of the Gospel of John, in its original Aramaic-informed context, says not "in the beginning was the Word" as an abstract philosophical statement, but as a cosmological fact. Sound came first. Vibration came first. Before form, before matter, before the structured world, there was the living sound of the source expressing itself. And matter is what that sound looks like when it slows down enough to become visible. Neil Douglas Klotz, a scholar of Semitic languages and the founder of the Abwin Study Circle, who has dedicated decades to recovering the original Aramaic meaning beneath the Greek translations of early Christian texts, makes this point with extraordinary clarity. He describes Aramaic as a language in which every word carries multiple simultaneous layers of meaning, physical, psychological, cosmic, all active at once. When you translate Aramaic into Greek and then into English, you collapse all those layers into one. You get a flat, single-meaning word. And in that flattening, most of the transmission is lost. This is not a small loss. This is the difference between a living key and a photograph of a key. The Hebrew letters, which share the same root system as Aramaic, were understood in the Kabbalistic tradition as vessels of force. Each letter was a shape of divine energy, a specific configuration of the infinite expressing itself. And the combinations of letters that formed words were understood as specific interactions of those forces, creating, dissolving, transforming specific aspects of reality. This understanding was not metaphorical. It was functional. It was the operating system of a tradition that understood sound, breath, and intention as the three primary tools of consciousness working with reality. In Aramaic specifically, there is a quality that I find nowhere else in any language I have encountered. And I want to be careful here because this is my personal experience, not a scholarly claim, a quality of immediacy. When you hear Aramaic spoken aloud, something in the body responds before the mind has processed anything. There is a resonance that bypasses intellectual understanding and lands somewhere deeper, somewhere older, as if the body recognizes a frequency it has always known but had forgotten was a language. This is not accidental. This is the design. The early Gnostic masters, those who preserved and transmitted the inner teachings that the institutional church worked hard to suppress, understood spoken words as keys. Not metaphorically, literally. Specific sound configurations that interact with specific layers of the subtle body and the subtle field, opening what was closed, dissolving what was locked, restoring what had been obscured. The tradition of sacred sound as functional spiritual technology is ancient and cross-cultural. You find it in the Vedic tradition with mantra, in the Egyptian tradition with the Heka, in the Pythagorean tradition with the music of the spheres. But in the Aramaic tradition, it has a specific quality, a directness, a groundedness. Because Aramaic is not primarily a mystical language. It is an everyday language. A language of the market, the family, the field, the fishing boat. And that is exactly what makes it powerful for this specific transmission. The word Mary Magdalene carried was not an exotic sacred term reserved for temple ritual. It was a word she would have spoken in ordinary conversation. A word that any Aramaic-speaking person of her time and place would have known. And yet, in her transmission, in the way she understood it, held it, and offered it, it carried the full weight of a cosmological key. Because the most powerful spiritual technology is never the most complicated. It is always the simplest thing, understood at the deepest level. You're almost at the word now. One more breath. Because I want you to arrive there with the full understanding of what it is about to do. The Archons, as you now understand, operate in the frequency of separation. They are the architects of the experience of being cut off from source. Their entire structure, every loop, every mimicry, every subtle pull toward contraction, depends on one foundational premise remaining intact. The premise that you are separate, that there is a you here and a source somewhere else. That the distance between you and the divine is real, fixed, and requires years of effort to cross. The word Mary Magdalene carried does not argue against that premise. It does not provide a better philosophical framework. It does not offer a more sophisticated theology. It collapses the premise itself. It speaks directly from inside the unified field, not toward it, not about it, but from within it. And in that speaking, the architecture of separation simply has no ground left to stand on. That is what you are about to receive. The word is Allah. Say it quietly right now, just to yourself. Allah. 3 syllables. Each one a breath opening, each one a release. Allah. This is the word Mary Magdalene used when she spoke of the divine. Not as a theological term, as the most natural word in her language for the totality that she lived inside of and never experienced herself as separate from. In Aramaic, Allah is the word for God, but not God in the sense that 2,000 years of institutional religion has trained you to hear that word. Not a being on a throne, not a supernatural authority requiring obedience, not a patriarchal overseer demanding petition and submission. Allah means the all that is, the undivided totality. The unified field that has no inside or outside, no here or there, no self and other. It comes from the root El, the ancient Semitic name for divine presence, one of the oldest names in the entire Semitic language family, combined with the Aramaic suffix that transforms a noun into a totality. El plus the totality marker. The divine presence that is all of it. Every particle, every breath, every moment, every form, every formlessness. Nothing outside it, nothing excluded from it. Nothing that is not, at its root, this. Now feel what happens in your body when you really hear that. There is no separation inside Allah. Separation requires 2 things, a here and a there, a self and an other, an inside and an outside. Allah has none of those divisions inside it. It is the word for the state of reality before the demiurge introduced the architecture of division. It is the frequency of what was there before the copy was made. And this is precisely, with exact functional precision, why it dissolves archonic structures. The archons exist in and as the frequency of separation. They are the frequency of separation given form and function and a kind of subordinate intelligence. They can only operate in a consciousness that is vibrating at the frequency of separation, a consciousness that is experiencing itself as cut off from source, as limited, as a separate self navigating a world it did not choose and cannot fully understand. That is the frequency they can interface with. That is the signal they can lock onto. When you speak Allah, not as a label, not as a religious formula, but as a declaration of the actual nature of reality. You are shifting your vibrational signature. You are no longer broadcasting from the frequency of separation. You are broadcasting from the frequency of undivided totality. And the Archonic structures, which are built entirely from and for the frequency of separation, simply cannot find purchase in that field. There is nothing for them to grip. It is like a wave looking for the shore it can crash against and finding instead that it is the ocean. This is what Mary Magdalene understood, not as theology, as direct experience. Let me take you into the layers of this word, because each layer adds weight to your understanding, and therefore to the word's function when you speak it. The first layer is the phonetic layer. Allah. Notice what your body does when you say this slowly. The mouth opens wide on a sound that in virtually every ancient language tradition is associated with the breath of source, the first sound, the sound of origination. In Sanskrit, in Hebrew, in ancient Egyptian, in Aramaic, the ah sound is the breath of the divine. You are beginning the word in the sound of source itself. Then la, a sound of flowing, of pouring outward, of the source expressing itself into form. In Hebrew and Aramaic, the letter lamed, from which this sound comes, is associated with the ox goad, the tool of purposeful direction, the divine moving with intention, with purpose, with the intelligence that says this way and not that way. Then ha, the exhale, the breath releasing. In Hebrew, the letter he is literally drawn as a figure with arms raised in a posture of offering, of releasing upward, of the human form opening toward the sky. The final sound of Allah is the breath of surrender, not defeat, but offering. The releasing of the individual claim back into the totality from which it arose. So the full word, Allah, is a complete spiritual movement encoded in three sounds. The breath of source, the purposeful flow outward into form, the offering back, origination, expression, return. The entire cycle of consciousness in one word. This is not a coincidence. This is the design of the Aramaic mystical tradition. The people who preserved and transmitted these words understood them as complete transmissions, not pointing toward a teaching but being the teaching, encoded in the structure of the sound itself. The second layer is the cosmological layer. Allah predates the demiurge's creation in the Gnostic understanding. It names the reality that exists before the copied world, before the architecture of separation was constructed, before the Archons were given their administrative function. To speak Allah is to reach back, or more accurately, to reach through the constructed world to the living source underneath it. It is not a prayer sent upward to something outside. It is a declaration of what is actually true at the level of reality that the Archonic structure is built on top of and tries to obscure. The third layer is the most personal, and it is the layer that Mary Magdalene lived from. In Aramaic spirituality, a word for the divine is not primarily a theological category. It is a relational reality. Allah is not a name for God in the abstract. It is the name of the living presence that you are inside of right now and have never for a single moment been outside of, regardless of what your experience of separation tells you. When Mary spoke Allah, she was not invoking something distant. She was naming the field she was already standing inside. She was speaking from the center of the unified field, recognizing the unified field, and in that recognition, the experience of separation, the experience the Archons depend on, had nowhere to live. I want to say something here from my own conviction, because I think it is important. I believe the reason this word was never popularized, never became the central teaching that got passed down in the way that other aspects of early Christianity did, is precisely because it is too equalizing. Allah does not create hierarchy. It cannot, because in Allah there is no separated self that is higher than another separated self. There are no separated selves at all. There is only the totality knowing itself through an infinite variety of expressions. A tradition built on Allah as its living center cannot build the structures of religious power that require you to be permanently beneath someone who has special access to the divine. Allah gives you direct access. Allah is the direct access, and that is incompatible with systems that need your separation to be real and your dependence to be permanent. So the word was flattened, translated, moved from Aramaic into Greek, and in that translation, something essential was lost. The living vibrational reality became a theological concept. And theological concepts can be controlled. Living vibrational realities cannot. Mary Magdalene knew this. She kept the word alive not in texts but in transmission. In the breathing, speaking, living chain of those who received it from her and carried it forward. And now you are receiving it. Allah. Say it again. Not quickly. Let each syllable open fully. Ah, wide open. La flowing forward. Ha releasing. And then rest in the silence after. Because the silence after Allah is not empty. It is the field that the word has just cleared. The spaciousness that remains when the archonic noise has been given no frequency to cling to. Understanding the word is one thing. Understanding when and how Mary used it is something else entirely. And this is where the teaching gets truly practical. The Archons are not uniformly active in your consciousness at all times. They have peak moments. Moments when their interference is at maximum intensity. And if you understand those moments, if you can recognize them when they arrive, you know exactly when Allah is most needed and most powerful. The peak moments of Archonic interference are not the ordinary difficult moments of life. They are not the frustrating Monday mornings, the minor conflicts, the everyday irritations. The Archons are most active at the moments of genuine spiritual breakthrough, at the threshold moments, the moments just before something real opens in your consciousness. This is when the pull backward is strongest. This is when the doubt is loudest. This is when the grief, the confusion, the sense that everything has collapsed and nothing is real, arrives with its full force. Think about why this would be so. The Archons have no interest in interrupting your ordinary day. Your ordinary day is already running on their frequency. The contracted, separated, anxious self going about its contracted, separated, anxious life. This is not a threat. This is the system operating as designed. The Archons only need to intervene when something threatens to break the pattern. When a genuine opening is occurring. When the light is actually getting in. This is exactly the situation Mary Magdalene was in at the moment of the resurrection. She had arrived at the absolute lowest point. Her teacher was gone. The story she had understood herself to be living, the story of the coming transformation, the dawning of the new consciousness, the revolution of the human heart, appeared to be over. She was in grief so complete that the whole world had contracted to a single unbearable point. And that is the precise moment when the Archonic pressure is highest. Because at the lowest point, the separation feels most real. The distance from source feels infinite. The cold mechanical universe, the demiurge's creation, indifferent to the human heart, feels like the only reality there is. This is the moment the Archons choose. When you are in grief, when you are in confusion, when you are in the spiritual crisis that makes you question everything you thought you understood about reality. This is when they press hardest. Because this is when you are most likely to capitulate. To decide the separation is real. To decide the source does not care. To decide you were wrong to believe in anything beyond the mechanical world. Mary did not capitulate. I think about this a lot. I think about what it took, what internal architecture was required to hold her position in that darkness. She did not perform certainty. She did not suppress the grief. The grief was real. The loss was real. The darkness was real. And she moved through all of it without capitulating to the Archonic conclusion that separation is the final truth. And the tool she used, the thing that kept her frequency from collapsing entirely into the Archonic field, was not a complicated spiritual technology. It was the simplest thing. A word. A single word in her own language that named the reality she could not see, but could not stop knowing was there. Allah. The all that is. The undivided totality that does not end because a particular form of it has ended. The source that is not threatened by the worst that the material world can produce. She spoke it not because she felt it was true in that moment. She spoke it because she knew it was true underneath everything the moment was telling her. And in that speaking, something shifted. Not instantly, not dramatically, but the Archonic conclusion. Separation is final. The source does not hold you. You are alone in a cold universe. Was denied the surrender it was seeking. And in being denied that surrender, it lost its grip. This is the teaching about how to use Allah that most people miss entirely. You do not use it when you feel good. You do not use it as a celebration of your existing elevated state. You use it in the dark. You use it at the threshold. You use it in the moment when the Archonic pull toward capitulation is strongest. And you speak it not from a place of already feeling its truth, but from a place of choosing its truth over the Archonic alternative. There is a concept in ancient Aramaic spirituality, the concept of Saf, which refers to the clearing of the inner field, the restoration of clarity to a consciousness that has become clouded. Saf is not achieved by fighting the cloudiness. It is achieved by speaking what is true from below the cloudiness, by reaching through the Archonic interference to the bedrock reality underneath it and naming that reality out loud. Allah is the sound of Saf. It is the word that clears the field, not by attacking what is false, but by restoring what is true. And here is something that I think is critically important, something that I believe most channels that talk about Archons completely miss. The dissolution of Archonic structures does not look like a battle. It does not look like a warrior driving back the darkness. It looks like a shift in attention, a quiet but absolute reorientation, a turning toward what is actually real. The Archons are not destroyed in this process. The word dissolve is more accurate. They dissolve the way a shadow dissolves when you turn on a light. Not because the light attacked the shadow, but because the shadow was never a thing in itself. It was only the absence of light. And in the presence of Allah, in the presence of the unified, undivided totality, the Archonic structures of separation are revealed as what they always were. Not powerful adversaries, absences, gaps, places where the light had not yet been invited to return. The whisper matters here too. Your title uses that word, whispered, and it is not poetic decoration. There is a teaching embedded in it. The most powerful invocation is not the loudest one. The Archons, in their mimicry of divine power, are drawn to performance. They can interface with the part of you that is performing spirituality, the part that shouts sacred words to prove conviction, that performs devotion to feel spiritual, that uses sacred technology as a display of advancement. A whisper bypasses all of that. A whisper comes from the honest interior, from the place that is not performing anything for anyone, including yourself. From the naked, honest, unadorned position of a consciousness that simply knows what is true and speaks it quietly from that knowing. Mary whispered Allah from her genuine inner position, and the Archonic field around her dissolved. I need to tell you something now that most channels in this space will never say, because saying it is uncomfortable. It requires admitting that sacred knowledge can be misused not only by cynical people with bad intentions, but by genuinely sincere people with deep intentions. Including you, including me. Allah can be misused, not in a dangerous, dark magic sense, but in a way that is quietly self-defeating. And if I send you away from this video with the word but without this warning, I am not fully serving your awakening. I am giving you a tool without giving you the instruction manual for what not to do with it. The primary misuse is this, using Allah as a spiritual escape hatch. Using it to avoid the very inner experience that the word is designed to help you move through. This is called spiritual bypassing, and it is one of the most common and most costly mistakes on the spiritual path. And the Archons, I say this with complete seriousness, love spiritual bypassing. Because spiritual bypassing keeps you using sacred tools in service of the same avoidance that the Archonic structure depends on. Here is what it looks like in practice. You are in grief, or in rage, or in the particular darkness of realizing that something you believed deeply was not true. These are uncomfortable states. The ego, itself a partially Archonic construct, wants relief from these states as quickly as possible, so it reaches for the sacred tool. It speaks Allah not from honest inner position, but from the position of I want this feeling to stop. And because you are a sincere spiritual practitioner, it even frames this reaching as devotion, as surrender, as spiritual practice. But underneath the beautiful framing, the real movement is avoidance. And Allah, spoken from a position of avoidance, does not dissolve the Archonic pattern. It bypasses the surface of the pattern while leaving the root entirely intact. And the root grows deeper, because now it has a spiritual justification for not being examined. I spent years doing this. I want to say that plainly, because I think it matters. Years of using beautiful, genuine, powerful sacred words and practices from a position of, if I am completely honest, fear. Fear of the darkness in my own interior. Fear of the grief that needed to be felt. Fear of the anger that needed to be acknowledged. I was using light to avoid shadow. And the shadow kept growing, because shadow does not dissolve when you shine light past it. It dissolves when you shine light at it, when you look directly at it. When you say, this is here, this is real. I am not going to dress it up or move around it or transcend it prematurely. I am going to be honestly here with it first. Mary Magdalene did not bypass her grief at the tomb. She went all the way into it. She was in the darkness before the light came. The darkness was not a failure of her spiritual understanding. It was the condition of her honesty. And it was from inside that honest darkness, not from above it, not past it, not in spite of it, that Allah became active. The preparation for Allah is not a ritual. It is an honesty check. Before you speak the word, you stop and you genuinely ask, where am I right now? Not where am I spiritually supposed to be? Not where I wish I was. Where am I actually? What is actually running in my inner field right now at this moment? And you let the honest answer be whatever it is. Anger, grief, confusion, fear, boredom, spiritual flatness, doubt, whatever is actually there. You acknowledge it, not to amplify it, not to dramatize it, just to see it clearly without the spiritual costume you have been trained to dress it in. And then, from inside that honest acknowledgement of where you actually are, you speak Allah, not to escape where you are, but to remember what is true underneath where you are. That is the difference. That is everything. When Allah comes from honest consciousness, when it arises from genuine acknowledgement rather than spiritual performance, it does not bypass the Archonic pattern. It lands directly at the root of it, at the foundational premise of separation that the entire pattern is built on. And from there, it dissolves. Now I want to give you the practice, not as a set of instructions you follow mechanically, as a living transmission in the same spirit that Mary Magdalene would have offered it to those who came to her ready to receive it. I will speak it the way she might have, not from above you, not at you, but with you, as a fellow traveler who has found something real and wants to put it directly in your hands. The first movement is stillness, not the performance of stillness, not sitting in the correct posture with the correct expression. Actual stillness, which begins with honesty. So before anything else, just stop, wherever you are, whatever device you are watching this on. Stop the momentum of your ordinary thinking for just a moment and ask yourself the simplest possible question. Where am I right now? Not philosophically, practically. What is the actual texture of my inner field at this moment? Is there tension? Is there tiredness? Is there the particular flatness of a consciousness that has been running its loops for too long without rest? Is there grief? Is there something unresolved sitting in the background, like a low hum? Whatever is there, see it. Just see it. No judgment. No spiritual framework applied over the top of it. Just honest seeing. This is the saf, the clearing of the field that begins not with the word, but with the willingness to look clearly at what is present before the word arrives. Sit with that honest seeing for a few breaths. Let it be what it is. Now the breath. In the Aramaic mystical tradition, the breath before the first sound is sacred. The alap, the first letter of the Aramaic alphabet, is not actually a consonant. It is the breath before language begins. It is the silence that makes the word possible, the nothing out of which the something arises. Before you speak Allah, you breathe the alap. One slow, complete breath in, no forcing, no controlling, and then a natural, full release. Not a technique, just a conscious breathing. A reminder to the body that it is a breathing, living vessel and not a machine running programs. In the pause after that breath, in the alap, rest for just a moment. This is the space before the Archonic noise fills back in. This is the gap. And in the gap, you are already closer to what Allah names than you were a moment ago. Now speak the word, Allah. Let it form itself. Do not force it into a particular sound. Let it arise from the honest interior you have just cleared. Wide open origination. La, flowing forward, divine intention moving into form. Ha, the exhale, the offering, the release back into the totality. Allah. Let the final ha breathe out fully, and then rest in the silence that follows. The silence after Allah is not empty. It is the field the word has just touched. The spaciousness that opens when the Archonic interference has been given no frequency to cling to. Stay there, even for just a few seconds. Let the silence be as long as it wants to be. Now the 3 rounds, and each round has a specific internal quality that is important. The first round is for recognition. You are not yet dissolving anything. You are simply seeing clearly. As you speak Allah the first time, the internal quality is, I see what is here. I see the pattern that has been running. I see the Archonic loop, whether it is fear or unworthiness or the circular seeking that never arrives. I see it clearly without fighting it, without endorsing it. Just clear seeing. Allah spoken as the light that makes the seeing possible. The second round is for dissolution. Now the word carries a different quality. Not aggressive, not forceful. The quality of release, of letting the root of the pattern, the foundational premise of separation that the whole structure grows from, be touched by the frequency of undivided totality. You are not attacking the Archonic structure. You are withdrawing your vibrational endorsement of it. You are speaking from the level of reality where separation is not a fact. And in that speaking, the structure built on separation loses its ground. Allah has spoken as the unified field reclaiming its own territory. The third round is fulfilling. In Gnostic tradition, the pleroma, the fullness, is the state of reality when the archonic absence of life is replaced by the genuine presence of the living source. After dissolution, there is a space, and the archonic structures, if not replaced, will reconstitute. So the third alaha is not about dissolving but about filling, breathing in the fullness that is the actual nature of the field you exist within, letting the word open you to the living presence that was always there, underneath the archonic overlay. Allah has spoken as welcome, as recognition that the source you were pretending to be separate from has always been the ground you were standing on. 3 rounds, 3 qualities: recognition, dissolution, filling. The whole practice takes perhaps 2 minutes. It does not require a special location. It does not require particular clothing or a particular time of day. It requires only honesty of position and genuine attention. Mary Magdalene did not practice this in a temple. She practiced it in the most ordinary moments of her extraordinary life. At the edge of the sea, on dusty roads, in the middle of conversations that had suddenly revealed the archonic pattern running beneath them. In the darkness before dawn, Allah was not her ritual. It was her breath, the constant, quiet, honest naming of what was actually real underneath everything that was trying to convince her otherwise. What changes when you practice this consistently is not dramatic. I want to be honest about that because I think the spiritual world oversells transformation and undersells the slow, deep, unremarkable work of genuine change. What changes is the texture of your relationship with the archonic loops. They do not disappear, at least not quickly, but you begin to recognize them faster. The gap between the loop starting and your recognition of it gets shorter. And in that shorter gap, you have something you did not have before: choice. The ability to see the archonic pattern, to name it honestly, and to speak Allah from below it before the pattern has had time to fully install itself as your reality for the next several hours. That is freedom, not the dramatic, once and for all liberation that spiritual ego wants. The real, practical, daily, accumulating freedom of a consciousness that is learning to choose the unified field over the separated self, one honest moment at a time. I want to bring you back to Mary now, to the full picture, because we have traveled a long way in this video, through Archons, through Aramaic, through the word itself and its practice, and I do not want you to leave without feeling the full weight of what she carried and what it cost her and what it means that this transmission has survived to reach you today. Mary Magdalene carried this teaching through the period immediately following the crucifixion, the period when the entire movement could have collapsed into grief and dispersed into history as another failed messianic moment. She did not let that happen. Not because she was performing strength, but because she had direct access to the thing that cannot be crucified, the undivided totality, Allah, the source that is not threatened by the worst that the material world can produce. She spoke it in the darkness. She taught it to those who came to her. She built the early transmission circles, small, intimate, focused on direct experience rather than institutional theology, that preserved what would otherwise have been entirely lost. The Cathar communities of medieval southern France, among the most sophisticated spiritual communities of the medieval world, and among the most brutally persecuted, preserved fragments of the Magdalene transmission. They called themselves the bons hommes and bons femmes, the good men and good women, and their central understanding was almost identical to what we have been discussing today: that the material world is the product of a secondary creator, that the human consciousness is not native to it, that there is a direct path back to the source that requires no institutional mediation. That path, for them, was the living transmission that Mary Magdalene had carried out of the earliest community and into the living chain of those who received it and passed it forward. The Cathars were exterminated by the Albigensian Crusade in the 13th century, systematically and completely destroyed, because what they carried was incompatible with systems of religious power that depend on you believing your separation from the source is real and requires institutional management. But the transmission survived, because transmissions of this kind always survive. They do not live in texts. They live in the living chain. And the living chain is impossible to fully sever as long as even one person in it holds the frequency and passes it forward. You are now in that chain. I say that not as a romantic gesture. I say it as a functional fact. Allah, understood not as a theological term, but as the living frequency of the undivided totality, is now something you carry. You have received the understanding. You have been given the practice. And what you do with it from this moment forward is your part of the chain. I want to say something about the specific relevance of Mary Magdalene's transmission for the moment we are living in right now. Because I believe, genuinely, from everything I understand about the current state of collective consciousness, that the archonic pressure is at a particular intensity in this era. The specific quality of archonic interference that our moment specializes in is information fragmentation. The splitting of consciousness into an infinite number of partial perspectives, each one feeling urgent, each one generating reaction, none of them providing the still center from which genuine discernment is possible. The Archons of this era do not primarily work through religious dogma. They work through the endless stream of content, opinion, identity, and reaction that keeps the human consciousness permanently agitated, permanently on the surface, permanently unable to find the depth at which Allah lives. This is why the word matters now with a particular urgency, not as an escape from the world, not as a spiritual bypass of the genuine problems of this moment, but as the thing that makes it possible to engage those problems from below the archonic agitation, from the unified field that can see clearly what the fragmented surface cannot. Mary Magdalene is not a historical artifact. This is my personal conviction, and I will say it plainly. She is a living frequency in the collective field. The transmission she carried is not locked in the past. It is available, right now, to any consciousness honest and courageous enough to receive it. When you work with Allah, when you practice it in the way we have described, from honest inner position, with the three-round movement of recognition, dissolution, and filling, you are not doing archaeology. You are making contact with a living stream of transmission that has never stopped flowing. She carried it through the darkness so that it could reach you in yours. You did not find this video by accident. I know that sounds like something people say. I mean it as a functional statement. The consciousness that arrives at a video like this, that has the background understanding to receive it, the patience to travel the full journey, the honesty to sit with what it actually says rather than the more comfortable version. That consciousness is not here randomly. Something in you is already resonating with this transmission. Something in you recognized, before you consciously decided anything, that this was worth your full attention. And now you are here at the end, and you are carrying something you did not have an hour ago. Not information. A key. Allah. But I want to be clear about what this key is not. It is not a magic word that will instantly resolve every archonic pattern you have ever run. It is not a shortcut past the genuine work of consciousness. It is not a spiritual status symbol to add to your collection of esoteric knowledge. The Archons, as you now understand, would love for you to treat it that way. They can survive any sacred word used as performance. They cannot survive Allah spoken from genuine honesty, from the real interior, from the position of a consciousness that has stopped pretending and started actually choosing. So the charge I want to leave you with is this. Use it in the real moments. Not the ceremonial ones. Use it when the loop starts, when the fear arrives wearing the costume of wisdom, when the grief makes the separation feel permanent and the source feel absent, when the spiritual bypass impulse rises up and tells you to transcend what actually needs to be felt. In those moments, the dark ones, the real ones, the ones that reveal exactly where you actually are, that is when you stop. You breathe the all up. You acknowledge what is honestly present, and then from below all of it, you speak Allah, and you let it do what it does. The larger picture is this. Every single time a human consciousness genuinely dissolves an archonic pattern, not bypasses it, not manages it, not transcends it prematurely, but actually dissolves it at the root through honest encounter with what is real, it affects the collective field. You're not doing this only for yourself. Every dissolution of separation consciousness, however quiet, however unremarkable from the outside, is a contribution to the field that every other human consciousness swims in. Mary Magdalene understood this. It is why she carried the transmission, even when carrying it was costly. Because the transmission was not hers to keep. It was hers to move forward. What she carried has reached you today. Across 2,000 years of institutional suppression, deliberate erasure, systematic distortion, it has reached you. That is how indestructible the living transmission is when it is rooted in something as fundamental as the undivided totality itself. She did not carry Allah as a theological argument. She carried it as a lived reality, as the constant quiet knowing that the source does not abandon its own. That the separation the demiurge's world insists on is a condition of the constructed reality, not a fact of the deeper reality. That beneath every archonic loop, beneath every contraction, beneath every experience of being lost and small and cut off, Allah is there. The all that is unchanged, undiminished, uninterrupted. Waiting not for you to earn your way back to it, but for you to remember you never actually left. You are not a seeker crawling toward the light across an infinite distance. You are the light, momentarily convinced of its own darkness. And Allah, spoken honestly from the real interior, in the real dark moments, is the remembering. So right now, before you close this video, before you move on to the next thing, one time, speak the word, Allah, out loud if you can, quietly if you need to, but genuinely, from wherever you honestly are right now. Let each syllable open fully. Ah, the breath of origination. La, the flow of divine intention. Ha, the release back into the totality. And then rest in the silence. That silence is not empty. That is the field Allah has just cleared. That is the ground Mary Magdalene was standing on when she carried this transmission through the darkness so it could reach you today. Carry it forward, honestly, daily, in the real moments. That is everything. Now I need to say something directly. YouTube has demonetized this channel because this kind of transmission is exactly what advertisers do not want sitting in your mind. I will not dilute this work for algorithmic approval. I will not stop. Instead, I am going deeper. But I cannot sustain this mission alone. I need your support to keep this channel alive. If something in this video shifted something in you, click the link in the description and join me on Patreon right now. You will immediately unlock unfiltered, esoteric member-only videos, exclusive audio podcasts, and the deeper teachings they will not let me release publicly here. Half the people who started this video are already asleep again. You already know you will not.